Hello, everyone. This is Allie Mastardo, Senior Association Manager of PPRA. Thank you for joining us today for the FP2 and PPRA webinar, Impact of the Pandemic on Our Roads, a Local Perspective. This is the second webinar in a two-part webinar series that FP2 and PPRA are teaming up for. We do have you all on mute for the webinar, and we'll be using the question function for any questions you may have during the presentation. All questions will be answered at the end. The webinar is being recorded and will be provided via email to all registered attendees. We'll now turn the webinar over to Jim Malthrop, FP2's Executive Director, to provide more information on FP2 and introduce today's speakers. Jim?
Thanks, Ann, and thanks to everyone. And a special thanks to the Pavement Preservation and Recycling Alliance for their assistance in making this webinar a reality. See here, FP2 is a nonprofit. We have a lot of contributors to our organization, including a lot of other industry associations that are noted on the next slide, as you'll see here. And also want to recognize a recent contributor, that's Pacific Geosource out in Oregon. So thanks again for allowing us to spread the word about preservation, and we appreciate the contributors' efforts. So why this webinar? You'll see here on the screen the impact of the pandemic has had on state and local tax revenues. Their effect will be to maintain and preserve pavements and asset infrastructure. And as you probably have been reading in the paper, there are a lot of impacts, and it remains to be seen what's going to happen with the remainder of the 2020 construction season and what may extend into 2021. So with that, let me introduce our speakers for today. Brittany Kohler is the Legislative Director of Transportation and Infrastructure for the National League of Cities, advocating on behalf of 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across the U.S. with more than a decade of experience in infrastructure and policy. Her portfolio includes traditional transportation and emerging technology, including autonomous vehicles, drones, shared transit, and micromobility. Prior to joining the National League of Cities, she worked at the U.S. Department of Transportation, Amtrak, and the American Society of Civil Engineers. She began her career working on strategic initiatives and public-private partnerships in the transportation, water, and aviation industries. Next will be Pat Kennedy and Angela Hager from the City and County of Denver. Pat retired in August of 2021 after 28 years working for the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure as engineering manager for the Office of Asset Management. Pat is past chair of the steering committee for the Metropolitan Government Pavement Engineers Council in the Denver area and the Rocky Mountain West Pavement Preservation Partnership. Angela is an engineering specialist with the City and County of Denver and has degrees from the Colorado School of Mines and the University of Colorado, Denver. She's worked in the area of asset management throughout her 16-year career with the City of Denver. And then finally, the last speaker will be Jerry Dankbar, who, as you can see there, is the Street Maintenance Superintendent, Department of Public Works for the City of Roseville, California. Jerry began his career in public works with the County of Sacramento in 1989. In 2000, he joined the public works team at the City of Roseville as street maintenance superintendent, and he oversees a number of activities, including paving, drainage, sweeping, pavement markings, signs, and street resurfacing for the programs, or for the city's 556 centerline miles of pavements. He's been an active member of APWA since 1998 and is a member of the Maintenance Superintendents Association and the International Municipal Signal Association. So we hope you enjoy the webinar, and questions are encouraged at the end of the presentation, so please enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having us today and for taking time to consider not only what's going on at the national level, but how it's impacting you locally. I'd like to give you a quick presentation that hopefully will share some of the National League of Cities' latest research on where we are from a budgetary perspective as cities, but also some of the most recent trends and considerations that we hope you're going to be paying attention to as we move forward. So I'll begin by just saying that as the pandemic has come and stayed with us these past few months, there have been a number of city services that have been essential across every state and certainly are having to modify and adjust and consider what's next for them and how do they continue to provide productive, positive services to all of their citizens across the different areas. And pavement preservation is certainly one of those with all of our public works departments. I'll start with the bad news because it simply is what it is. There has been a tremendous loss of municipal revenue across the country. And the impact of COVID-19 and of physically shutting down operations has certainly been something that we needed to do. It was absolutely the right choice, but it certainly has had economic consequences. And so NLC's research team and our economists got together and really started to look through what do those losses look like collectively, and how can we work with Congress to attempt to find ways to lessen the impact of these revenue shortfalls. But overall, we're looking at about $360 billion in lost revenue over 3 years. Most of it will, of course, be this year, but we did anticipate that actually is going to ease out over the next 2 years, so through 2022. And as we look at what this means for city finances, we were very much sort of looking through, who's going to be most impacted, what does it look like? And one of the things that I think is very important to know is that cities of all size are really seeing the reduced revenue impact. And it's also going to be a little bit more severe in some places. Pennsylvania is certainly one of the places that might experience some of the worst revenue losses, while Connecticut is a little bit more protected through the revenue types of sources. If you depended on things like sales taxes, they're down right now. And so that's where you start to see a balance between types of tax structures and what those mean for revenue. And particularly to our transportation sources across the board, nationally, state, and locally, we've relied on gas taxes. And so all of those are down. And so the funding for transportation as a whole is down substantially. And we're still waiting to see the full impact of those numbers. But we do anticipate that it will create quite a gap at every level that we'll have to figure out how to make up for. As we think about also the importance of our employees at the municipal level, over 1/3 of the 3 million city employees across the country are experiencing furloughs, layoffs, and pay cuts. And frankly, a state of not only trying to serve the public, but of being very aware that their own job is at risk. And so that's been a tremendous element of concern for the National League of Cities. And we've taken that to Congress with our Cities Are Essential campaign to ask for significant attention to making sure that we can continue to keep our employees and to serve our communities. Many folks have asked us, what does this look like for an average city? And I've used Payson, Arizona as a sort of an example here. And they went into an ambitious capital plan. They had a great plan. They were strategic about what they were doing. They had $3 million in additional revenues from the town sales tax, and then of course COVID, right? So you start to realize what happens. They took a hit in their hotel industry. They saw some unemployment, of course, numbers rise through COVID, but all of a sudden they're now staring down a deficit and a 15% shortfall, if you will, of where they thought they would be. And so they start making those cuts. They start looking at street maintenance. They start looking at projects like splash pads that they're going to have to delay for the community. And it really is this type of town, a town of just like 15,000 people, but that was doing all the right things, but yet COVID has happened, and this is sort of the consequence of that. So as we think about where some of this revenue loss comes from and what you should know about that as it relates to your role in a city or managing transportation projects, is really to think about the impact of own source revenue. So cities really are revenue generating entities, and we come up with about 80% of our own revenue. And so if you think about where some of those cuts might be, you'll notice that charges, fees, other taxes, those small little efforts that end up being a large percentage of cities' budgets are really taking a hit right now. And you can see that in this next slide. Property taxes have been relatively stable, but yet you see sales taxes and those other fees and service fees really starting to make a difference. You also see things like permitting fees, not as many businesses opening, not as many revenue options there. So those are all things that are starting to culminate into those overall numbers. This just gives you a quick snapshot. Darker is where you're seeing more revenue losses in, and frankly, lighter is where you're seeing a little bit less, just to give you a quick shot of this. And I do link to the full report in the back of this so that you can grab that and go check out the full scope for your own area. But just some examples of cities across the country that are facing estimated losses. You can see that Detroit and Corpus Christi, you're seeing a larger number there. I think what's really important is to notice the percentage of that number, but to also recognize that if you're a smaller municipality, it's going to hurt a lot more when you're losing that ability to pay for the exact same thing. That material costs are the same in many places, and so you're going to be paying a little bit more for that cut. And as we look at infrastructure, many of the long-term choices that we have to make really come down to what we are already contracted to do and then what we are future contracting for. And so, many of our citizens don't realize that right now, the folks that they've seen out on the roads during COVID are now sort of continuing off of last year's contracts. And so it's really that forward view of what we're going to be trying to upkeep that matters a lot. And I'm sure our other presenters are going to get into some of the details about how they're making adjustments right now. But I would just challenge you that, municipal direct inputs into infrastructure are some of the most significant things that citizens will see and feel an impact in the next 6 to 12 months. And as we go through that process of deciding what has to be cut in order to move forward, and we balance our budgets, which is often required, is that next level of understanding of what we're going to need to do to move forward in a positive direction and keep up that level of adequate support for our infrastructure that we need to. I just wanted to reiterate that it doesn't matter how large a city was, or what type of urban, rural, or suburban community you are in. Most folks are having to delay significantly and are reporting back that they are cutting infrastructure. And so it's about 66%, give or take, across the board, but just to show you that dissection of how those numbers came back to us when we did a national survey of cuts that are coming because of COVID. Also, a little bit of a distinction across regions, not too much, but you're seeing, of course, the most projects being cut out in the West, followed by the Midwest. So I wanted to reiterate something that, in fact, the NHTSA had a webinar on today, and that is that safety challenges are still remaining with us despite vehicle miles traveled having dropped substantially. And I think that this is just a really important point for both the workers that are on the roads, but also considering how you're going to be doing your work and responding to your community and putting out public education messages. That deaths on roads are really remaining at a very substantial rate, and that what we would have expected is to see a decrease in pedestrian and car deaths because of the lesser miles driven, but we're not seeing that right now. And so as you consider your work, I would also just urge you to think about what you can do locally to be considering safety overall. And some of these are smaller adjustments that really are more collaborative across your city and your state. Really thinking about what is the safety net, what is the safe overall system that you can deploy as a community to consider, you know, what is the right speed for these roads, what is the right response and post-crash care that you can provide as a community, how can you be really reactive and even in a time when safety is our top priority, how do we make that true within our own structures, and to consider some of the low-cost interventions that are frankly popping up across the country. This is just a quick example from Tigard, Oregon. This is their Go Slow, Share the Street campaign. And really all they were doing is connecting a disconnected part of a heavily trafficked bike and pedestrian thoroughfare, which you can see over here in the green. And this red portion is the part where they essentially were creating some barriers, some pop-up installations to really block traffic from accessing this area without being residential, and to really encourage biking and walking that was safe through this area. So really creating connections between disconnects and using very simple resources, a few barrels, a few signs, to really make sure that folks were slowing down in this area and making sure that folks could get out despite COVID and exercise and enjoy the area. So I just encourage you to think about things like this as you're moving forward, where you may not be able to do other projects. I think just to really wrap up here, the most important thing that we are noticing is that Congress is continuing to raise this discussion about what needs to be done at the national level to really ease the burdens at the local level. And there is a general consensus among people of all ages and affiliations that we should be reacting to this at the national level. 88% of Americans are concerned that the impact of COVID is really going to drastically affect their local economy, their local jobs, what's happening at their local level. And we certainly understand that and want to continue that conversation as we go through this election period and arrive out of it. But want to reiterate that this continues to be a triple threat, if you will, between not only the safety impacts, but the cost of those impacts, and then the future of the decisions that you need to make as local officials and as public works officials. So I encourage you to take a look at all that's here, and certainly appreciate your interest in the National League of Cities and our work to really express how cities are essential during the COVID crisis. I'll now turn it over to our next speakers, Angela and Pat from Colorado.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm Pat Kennedy, recently retired and about 6 weeks ago, and I'll explain a little bit more of that, how COVID related to that in the presentation in a few minutes.
My name's Angie Yeager. I'm with the city and county of Denver. I've been here for about 16 years. And, looking forward to discussing the specific impacts that the city of Denver has had from COVID-19 and our budgetary implications as well.
So quick description of Denver. Population 730,000. And we're tucked up against the east side of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. It's the picture that flashed there and then went away. It's our air quality isn't quite that good today with the fires in the western U.S. Our air quality is in the bottom 10 of the nation or of the world right now. We have 5,740 lane miles of pavement. So if you think about that, you could drive from Denver to Miami to Boston and then back to Denver again in a single lane. That's what we have for lane miles of pavements. We're 19th largest metropolitan area in the U.S.
I apologize for the technical difficulties there. That was completely on my end. So Denver's somewhat unique in our paving operations. We have our own in-house asphalt plant, so not many municipalities have their own asphalt plant. Our plant produces on the order of 2,500 tons of asphalt per day that feed our in-house operations, as well as provide asphalt for our contracted mill and overlay, or contracted hot in place recycle program as well. So our own in-house staff, we have had three paving crews that did the paving operations on the streets in Denver, as well as the contracted operations for hot in place and chip seal. And that's kind of our standard preservation treatments that we have available to us. The city also recently went through a Go Bond initiative and had some additional contracted mill and overlay to get us to catch up on the backlog on our paving on a number of our arterial and collector streets.
So a little bit about where we were with our paving operations before we get into how COVID has affected it. As Angie said, we have in-house paving crews that do most of our mill and overlay work, although we have some contracted mill and overlay as well. And then the specialized treatments, hot in place recycle, which is our mid-level treatment, chip seal, which is our preservation treatment. Those are both contracted operations. We've done some studies in the past on, out of that 5,700 lane miles that we have, what's a good sustainable number? What do we need to do in order to maintain our serviceability of the streets? And what we determined is 430 lane miles is our target every year. And as the city grows, that number will grow as well. But that's based on looking at a typical preservation pattern of treatments you'd use on a road, how that over time, what that does and what you need to do to achieve that. And we're not looking to set a specific PCI goal per se, but we're looking at is to have, if you were to look at a histogram of the good, fair, poor, kind of having a good sustainable histogram, because you're always going to have a few streets in poor condition. You want to have bulkier streets in excellent, good condition. So we're looking at how we maintain that sort of a distribution of street conditions. And we've turned, in the current situation, we've looked at if we do 90 miles of chip seal and 90 miles of in-place recycling each year, and then 250 lane miles of the more aggressive rehabilitation mill and overlay treatments, that'll keep us at that sustainable level. And then when you look at how it has affected us based on budget, so when COVID hit this year within the city, we immediately projected that we were going to have a budget gap of $220 million. Out of it, the city's budget is somewhere in the range of $1.3 billion a year. So it's a pretty significant hit that the city took. And what it does is immediately all agencies were asked to reduce their general fund budgets and in some cases their capital budgets as well. And what that amounted to was hiring freezes that were immediately put in place. Early retirement incentive came into play, which is how I came to retire at the end of August. And then the city implemented furlough days. What this did is help to, between that and dipping into the city's reserves, helped us get through the budget, this current budget year. And Denver works on a calendar year, fiscal year. it helped us get through to where it would have a minimal impact on the ability to perform our capital maintenance in this calendar year. But you'll see here soon on how we had to make some adjustments to accomplish that goal.
So in 2020, we had 14.5 million reduced in general fund, which again supports that CIP program. We also had city furlough days. We had a reduction in fleet replacement vehicles that we need to do our day-to-day operations, and 3.9 million in utility and facility savings. So these were some of the items that impacted the 2020 budget. As we started to build our 2021 budget, there's still a lot of uncertainty about what is going to be in place, but it's all based on our revenues currently in place. So we're projected to have a $190 million budget gap from what we would expect to have in 2021. So again, we're looking at these same measures to cover that gap so that we can continue our operations, as Brittany said, providing the essential services that the citizens need and expect as best we can with minimal impact. So to cover that gap, we're looking at additional furlough days. The city has announced a number of furlough days, potential continuation of the hiring freeze, most likely going to continue forward with that. Yet to know exactly how long that's going to continue forward. But we're continuing to operate in this mode of uncertainty with the public health conditions and the budgetary implications. Every individual in our agency, from their personal lives to how it affects our citywide budget, is operating in this mode of uncertainty. So speaking about those staffing impacts, I apologize, trying to get back to the right slide. There we go. So in 2020, we currently, as of today, are facing a 19% vacancy rate in our staffing across the city. Within street maintenance alone, it's higher than that. I think we're at over 20%, slightly higher than that. And so as you can imagine, that impacts our ability to complete the work that we need to complete on a day-to-day basis. So that vacancy rate is made up not only from the hiring freeze, but also from the retirement incentive and other things that have come into play. As we previously talked about, the city has also put in place some furlough days to help close that budgetary gap. So in 2020, starting in, I believe it was in May, they announced that we had 5 scheduled furlough days and then 3 flexible ones, which again impacts our ability to get work done on a day-to-day basis. On the days when we have a scheduled furlough day, we don't have the operations that we otherwise would have. And then with those flexible furlough days, when you're down a staff member or two, it's hard to get the full paving operation done without those critical players. In 2021, our furlough days are looking at a sliding scale based on income. So lowest income levels get 6 furlough days, highest income levels 9 furlough days. I believe 4 of those are scheduled days again, and then anywhere from 2 or more flexible based on income.
So what's it done to us this year? When you look at the staffing losses, and Angie said we're about 20% plus loss in the crews in the current street maintenance staffing levels. We had 3 paving crews. Each of those paving crews had somewhere in the range of, when you looked at the mill and the paving crew together, somewhere in the range of 30 plus people, counting some of the hauling and all the other ancillary work. Well, when we're down that many people, we wound up losing one of those paving crews. We just shut down that crew and took those people and moved them around the agency in order to fill other holes that we had in staffing. So losing that crew, and we did that after they had already been established and out paving for a little bit in the spring, we were looking at about a 70-mile loss in potential paving from that crew. So we had to reallocate with those other paving crews, because we were able to beef them up to fully staff and maybe even an extra person or two to really make sure that they could accomplish what they intended. And then we worked with our contracted paving operations to see if they could absorb some of that as well. That gave us the opportunity to still meet that target of 430 lane miles that we want to do. But at the same time, it isn't necessarily the same lane miles that we want to do. If we lose lane miles out of a rehabilitation mill and overlay treatment and shift some of those lane miles to preservation treatment and do an increased chip seal, we can still hit our target lane miles, but it doesn't necessarily hit the right lane miles. Certainly more preservation is better, no argument there, but we have the potential to increase the backlog of streets within our network that need a major rehabilitation over time, and that's going to be something that could take a number of years before we can kind of recoup that.
So while we scrambled on the fly to reallocate our pavement treatments in 2020 in order to still hit that target of 430 lane miles, like Pat said, that isn't the distribution of treatments that we need in order to maintain that steady state distribution of the condition of our streets that we talked about when we set up that 430 lane miles of treatment that we're expecting to get each year. We're targeting 90 lane miles of chip seal, 90 lane miles of hot place repaving, and the rest with mill and overlay. And so that's kind of a sustainable model based on the condition of our network. As we scrambled and took streets from mill and overlay and put it on our preservation treatments, it put that out of balance with the condition of the streets. So moving into 2021, we wanted to bring back the intention of trying to maintain that distribution of treatment. So in doing so, our approach to doing this is we're still looking at only having 2 in-house crews. We don't foresee having additional staffing to the point that we can bring back that 3rd crew at this time. So we're going to maximize those 2 in-house paving crews as much as we can. We're going to contract our preservation treatments at the appropriate levels, not going to counterbalance those preservation treatments to make up the 430 lane miles. And then any remaining budget we have after doing those 2 operations, we're going to go to a contracted mill and overlay operation, which, you know, comes at a greater expense to the city. It's doing our own paving in-house is definitely a lower expense to the city, but the remaining budget, we will go ahead and contract out to contracted mill and overlay as best we can. Under this model, we're projecting that we're going to have a 3/4 of a point PCI decrease across the entirety of the network every year. And basically that's made up of that gap of the 3rd paving crew not being able to be in place and pave as many streets as they normally would.
So a quick discussion about, there's other impacts besides just paving. The same staff who does the paving work for the city, they're also take care of the winter maintenance as well, plowing of our streets and such. So just a quick discussion on that. Certainly, if you can't maintain your streets in the winter, that has the potential to cause extra damage to the streets due to freeze-thaw cycles and such. So there's potential for increased winter damage to the streets, but also with the COVID response that the city has done with opening streets to pedestrian traffic and turn them into recreation areas more, to give people more ways to get out of their house. Well, how are we going to maintain those streets in the wintertime? Who's going to plow those streets? Who's going to clear them off? So there's isolated areas like that at point locations, but also, again, with the staffing cutbacks, we don't have enough people to drive our plows now. So how are we going to accomplish that? So there's more of a network issue that goes back to the safety of the roads, and again, towards being able to maintain those in a good fashion, so we're not going to lose condition level over the winter.
So some of our operational impacts we've kind of talked about already. Social distancing is difficult when you're on a paving crew. I mean, you've got a crew of people out paving the streets, and a lot of times they're in close proximity. When the face mask requirement initially came out, our crews were required to wear face masks. So not only are they social distancing and wearing face masks, but they're behind a paver with 300-degree asphalt, and they're just, really struggling with that. Initially, the city came out and said that they needed to wear face masks, but after further consideration, they said that our crews in the field could take off the face masks as long as they maintain a 6-foot social distancing. Another implication has been just simple job site mobilization. Our crews show up in the morning and need to get out to the job site, but we have a limit on 2 people per vehicle to get to a job site. So that makes it difficult to get our crews out to the job site locations in the manner that we used to do it. You know, our staff, our support and engineering staff are all working from home, which brings all sorts of different levels of complexities as well. And technology issues, like we've been okay so far today. But I think in general, one of the biggest impacts we've seen is there is a general sense of stress and anxiety amongst society as a whole at this time. Whether we're talking, I mean, we're just talking about our implications here in our work lives, but when we start to look at the holistic being of everyone's lives, when we got our school implications, our home life implications, in this whole world of uncertainty, there is a lot of stress and anxiety that everyone is carrying with them on a day-to-day basis. So looking beyond 2021, as we mentioned, with the model we have for paving moving forward, as long as we only have 2 paving crews, as long as our revenues don't support bringing back that 3rd paving crew, we're going to continue to see a 3/4 of a point PCI reduction across our network every single year. So this is going to lead to an increased backlog in our paving need. Our streets are going to decrease in condition, and our paving need is going to be greater as we come out of this recovery. I briefly mentioned our GO bond. We had a bond initiative that was active right as COVID hit, and the intention of that GO bond was to do some of that catch up on a backlog of paving need. Now we're seeing that GO bond is really more addressing kind of keeping the network stable, and so it's not functioning for its intended purpose. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how this 3rd paving crew is going to move forward, whether we're going to have to abolish those positions, whether we'll get the funding in place to rebuild the crew, and what do we do with all the equipment that we still have? And right now, it's nice to have backup equipment, but at the end of the day, that's something that we could potentially get.
It's a lot of dollars sitting idle.
It is. You know, and that's our field crews. In the office, there's a lot of uncertainty about how we bring staff back, whether we work AV schedules, how we do that. And, you know, something I'd like to hit on is the coordination issues. What we have seen in Denver for our paving operations is not isolated to us alone. One of our big coordination issues has been the local water municipality has been changing out a bunch of lead service lines, and their whole program got delayed because they couldn't turn off water to residents while they were at home during COVID. And so we had a lot of paving operations that we had planned to tailgate on their lead line replacements. And so that scheduling issue, that coordination issue continues to cascade as we have a number of stakeholders who are also having similar issues.
So, you know, that pretty sums up kind of in general what we've been doing in Denver and how we're addressing it. Want to turn it over now to Jerry Dankbar for his take on it, and we want to thank you all for attending.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Pat and Angela. I'm Jerry Dankbar, Street Maintenance Superintendent for the City of Roseville. I'm going to briefly go over some of our budget issues, and basically I mirror what Pat and Angela are talking about as well in Colorado. Some of the same issues, but I'll get into some of those during the presentation. So, City of Roseville, who are we? Where are we? We're just above northeast of Sacramento, California, incorporated in 1909. We're the population job center of Placer County. We're at the southern end of Placer County, and there's a lot of people in Roseville now. We're up to 143,000. Daytime population rapidly approaching 200,000 because we have a lot of business here and jobs. So, excuse me, we have people coming into Roseville from Sacramento for jobs. We're about 42 square miles, not real big, but not real small. A lot of our own parks, fire, police, libraries, and luckily all of our utilities are owned by the City of Roseville, which makes it easy on me. So again, this is what I wanted to show here is we have center line miles about 486. Jim earlier during the introduction had me at over 560, but that number included we have a lot of gated communities, a lot of residential. So this one pared it down to 486, arterial, collector, and residential. And the map on the left is, I wanted to show you guys that this is our PQI map. So we have a pavement quality index. We don't normally go by the PCI, just the looking at the cracks alone. This gets a little more in depth on the PQI, and this shows where we're at. If you look to the left of the screen or on the map, that is going towards the west, and that is where we're growing. Those streets are all in good condition as the green. The blue is fair condition. You get into poor a little bit in the yellow, and the red in the center of town, a little bit older part of town. But this map, we've been resurfacing aggressively for 20 years and trying to stay proactive. And we have a few streets we haven't hit yet. Some of those reds and the kind of the orangish yellow, we haven't hit yet, but they're on the map. But as I'm going to show a little bit later, those are in jeopardy now. We may not be able to get to those. Our temperatures here, I just threw that in there just to show you guys. We come in middle of November, December, we shut down our paving and we can't pave anymore. It gets a little bit too cold. And then we can't pick up our paving again until probably April or May at the earliest, by the time the rains quit and it warms up a little bit. So pavement maintenance and goals and funding. Our pavement quality rating goals, we have goals and we've set those with our city council years ago. We've lowered them over the years because the funding is not always there. So we have a 72 for arterial collector, 65 for residential. Like I said, those are our goals. Right now we're at 69 for arterial collector. We're falling behind a little bit and it's falling fast. The curve is really getting sharp right now. And then residential, we're at 66. And then overall 68. So if you look at our overall program, we're doing pretty good. But like I said, the PQIs are falling fast and this COVID is not helping at all. So on the right side, I want to show a little bit of our fundings and our sources. We get 4.1 million in gas tax, and that funds some employees, some of our materials, not all of it, most of it's general fund, but most of that goes right towards resurfacing. We have 1.7 million come in for utility impact reimbursement. What that is since we're all city-owned utilities, we did a survey, back in 03 and 04, to find out why our roads are failing. And one of the things that we're finding out, and every agency I'm sure is, that it's the trenches that are underneath the roads. If the trenches fail, causes cracking, water gets in there, makes it worse. So we found out that between the water, the wastewater, and the drainage lines underground, that's our main failures that we're having and causing issues. So 70% of the lines underground were water and wastewater, and 30% were drainage. So since I'm drainage, I can't tax myself. What we did is we imposed a reimbursement fee to the water and wastewater divisions, and they gave us about $1.5 to $1.7 million per year for future damages to the road, for them having to dig up their lines, trench failures, anything else that may go wrong. So that really helps a bunch. Federal funding is about $700,000 per year. Transportation Development Act, TDA funds, which is our transportation division for our buses and our bikeways, they'll give anywhere from $500,000 maybe up to $2 million per year, but I left it alone at 0.5. So our annual resurfacing is around $7 million. Is that enough to maintain, to keep us at 72 and 65? No, it's not. We're finding now we need about 10 to 12 million overall to reach our goal. So we're struggling just like everybody else, and this pandemic's making it a little bit worse. So let's get into some of the impacts from the pandemic that we're seeing. Excuse me. Sales tax, or general fund revenue, is down about 8.5%. So what that means is about $13 million shortfall for the city, about 275 for street maintenance alone. Now, this 13 million, our city manager was able to work with the other department heads, and they whittled that down to only a couple million that they're going to pull from reserves. The rest of it, they cut programs between all of our general fund programs, and they were able to make some cuts to make up for a lot of that. So those are one-time cuts that they hopefully don't have to do later on, but we'll see what happens next year. Gas tax revenue is down. We don't know currently what that percentage is, but we're expecting 500,000, maybe $1 million less. We're not sure. So we haven't seen the numbers come in yet, but we're waiting for that. So what happens when it's down, and we know it's going to happen, is we're going to reduce the size and quantity of our resurfacing projects. We really don't have a choice. That's what we're going to do. But what does this do? So now we have to notify residents, because we've promised people that we're going to do their neighborhoods and do certain streets. So now we have to go back, re-advertise, let everybody know on our website what's going on, and then let city council know as well, because they were telling their constituents what we're going to do, and now we're not doing it. So now we have to let them know they're not going to be completed, or they're going to be delayed by a year or two, possibly 3. We don't know yet. So what's going to happen because of this? The PQI rating is going to fall lower, and then resurfacing is going to cost that much more to get back to where we were today, because materials go up, labor goes up. You've pushed it off 3 years. You can't do as much for the same dollar that you could today. Something else going on now is a hiring freeze to fill positions. Just as you heard earlier, we have 5 full-time positions in operations and maintenance, and 5 overall in operations, maintenance, and engineering. So what that means, we're unable to prepare streets, resurfacing, and unable to get the project out to bid in a timely manner. So I was down 3 maintenance worker positions and an engineering tech, and then our engineering division was down in, another associate engineer. So that means they can't get the projects out. And I'm not gonna be able to prep the streets. So three positions is almost 1 crew for crack filling. You know, you need maybe 4, and we're having to backfill with that. So I've got a little bit of leeway here where I have a signs and markings crew and a drainage crew, so I'm pulling from them. So we're not gonna be getting some of our other striping done, markings done on the roads. We're gonna put that off and put them onto the paving crew to help out with the crack seal, paving, patching, whatever we need to do. And then there's the employees needed time off to care for children who are distance learning, as you heard earlier. I've got 4 guys on 1 crew right now on my drainage crew that all are taking time off. Some are taking a week or 2 at a time, maybe 1 day here, 1 day a week. But it hurts, and we're not getting the drainage done that we need to in preparation for all the resurfacing treatment. So that's something that we either need to contract out that work, which costs more, or we put it off and don't do it. We don't want to do that, so we'll just have to shrink the whole project. By letting the contractor do some of this work. We know it's going to take more money, but we'll just resurface less streets. And then a purchasing freeze as well. City manager put us all in a purchasing freeze to replace worn out vehicles and equipment. So everything's going to get replaced from last year that didn't get done for whatever reason. Those are frozen. And then in this fiscal year, starting July 1, we're not replacing any equipment as well. So that's all on hold. And what happens is I've got worn out dump trucks, paving machine that's we're not going to replace right now, so we're just going to limp it along as much as we can. If we have problems, if we have the money, we'll try to rent a machine, but other than that, we're gonna have issues. So that's another thing that's jeopardizing what we're doing. So late start to the season to prep roads. When this hit on March 20th, I believe, we were all sent home until further notice. My staff, everybody stayed home, including myself and my other supervisors. We were home, working from home. All my maintenance staff were at home every day with full pay, taking care of emergencies only for the first 7 weeks. After that, we came back week on and week off, tried to get some maintenance done, taking care of emergencies again. We worked for other departments as well, doing their paving and patching. So we tried to catch up on all that. And then finally on Monday, July 6th, we all came back full staff. So we started doing our own preparation, further resurfacing on July 6th. So we're behind the 8 ball. We lost a lot of good months. We didn't get hardly any rain like we normally do. And so we had some great days that we lost out on that we could have been doing a lot of patching and repairing. Along with that, we had a late start to interview and hire temporary staff for our season. We normally hire 9 positions. This year, we had in the budget for 13 positions because we knew we were going to be doing some extra work. And by the way, this was budgeted in last year's gas tax, so it wasn't coming out of the general fund. But we had the money to do it, but everything was frozen down. We had a hard time getting the interviews going. So we did the online interviews and tried to get people in here and get them in place. So we finally got the temps in place in late August, which is kind of late, which we're running out of time now because, like I was saying, November, December, we're going to run out of weather to keep doing our work. But we're going to keep going as long as we can this year. Usually we clean the paver out in mid-November, but this year it could be December as long as the weather holds out. But we don't know. We got rain coming. So October 1st, 2020 update, where are we at? I was able to fill 3 positions just because we got our local gas tax projections. We thought it was going to be down 20%. Like I said earlier, it was only down 8.5. So I got to fill those and the engineering tech. One engineering tech and 2 maintenance workers. So we still have an associate engineer out, and then one of my maintenance workers is still unfilled. Some equipment's being replaced, but not all. Really, that's very little being replaced right now. And then all delays on resurfacing projects are causing our PQI ratings to go lower. We have a project that we're getting out. It's at the bid right now. It's a major microsurfacing on probably 15% of our arterial roads. This is like, we're yet over year 3 now getting it out. We should have had it out 3 years ago at least, but we've been short on staff, and then this hit everybody working from home. It's now out to bid. It's going to take a while. It's not going to get resurfaced until next year. It's going to go through another winter, which means a little more prep time in the spring. So our arterial roads have taken a big hit, and the PQIs I showed you earlier, the numbers, they're going to fall. When I do another survey next year, they're going to be much lower. So what do? We're reprioritizing projects, to fit the budget and then help preserve our PQI ratings. So in conclusion, the pandemic is costing the city millions of dollars by deferring maintenance to future years. So we're not sealing the good roads and not reconstructing some of the bad roads that are on the schedule this year in the next 2 years. It's going to take us many more years to get back to where we're at today. I see it taking 3 to 5 years. It's going to take a while. We'll continue to be proactive with resurfacing program with all available funding, keep the good roads in good condition, and continue working on the roads that need more expensive treatments. And that's what we're going to tell the residents. We're going to stick to keeping the good roads good. I doubt if we'll get to any of the really bad roads this year because it's more bang for the buck to keep the good roads good and keep our PQI levels where they're at. One thing we have going for us, we have a lot of growth in the west end of town that I showed you on the map, and that's really keeping our PQI levels up, because when you average out the entire network, for residential especially, because that's my biggest, most centerline miles and lane miles, it's keeping our PQIs looking good for right now. So we'll see how that goes in the future. So seal the good roads first is our motto. We always try to do that because we want to avoid this. We're trying to keep everything sealed so the water doesn't get in there, the sun doesn't dry out our roads, and keep them all in good condition. And where are we at? So that is it. Thank you very much. If you guys have any questions, let me know.
Thanks, Jerry. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to use the question feature on your side panel to enter those questions, and we'll answer those for you. We did have a few questions come in. The first question that we have that came in is actually for Brittany. What is the driving revenue downfall in 2021 and 2022?
So we're not going to know the overall shortage yet, but the numbers seem to be off by about 20%. And so I think that probably is sort of a baseline sort of right now. We should have those numbers fairly soon, and we'll have those on our website, and I think they'll be widely known. But I think right now the important thing is to recognize that we are up against a decision very soon with our national programs, and I think also with state and local programs, about really relying on a single revenue source. And what does that mean? And its adjustability is very almost impossible. We haven't adjusted the gas tax since 1993. And so that's a very important point to think about as we get into this discussion, is it's not just what's down today, it's what are we going to do to supplement and to diversify our revenue sources for the future.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is for Angela and Pat. You mentioned often about mill and fills and stated it as a rehabilitation technique. What kind of life extension do you expect for these?
In general, for the mill and overlays, if we're putting those on a residential street, our standard operation there is a 2-inch mill and overlay. We're getting about 17 years out of those. Now we want to do a preservation treatment to extend the life somewhere about halfway through that life cycle. But if we were to do a mill and overlay and just let it sit, we'll get about 17 years before that is drifted into fairly poor condition. On an arterial, we're looking at getting, arterial collector 8 to 12 years, depending on the traffic volumes on those.
Thank you. The next question we have is for the entire panel. The first part is directed towards Brittany. How do we solve, how do we solve this now and into the future? How do we solve this now and into the future? I know National League of City is lobbying Congress to help make up some of the shortfall. What are the chances of that happening?
So the National League of Cities has been asking Congress for $500 billion for states and localities to be able to essentially go to every municipality and provide some level of budget relief. Because revenue shortages are different in different areas. You'll see some places where sales tax were off by this, and other places where they're just not collecting the same revenue because things are closed. What we've encountered across the congressional spectrum is a very high stakes discussion. And there's certainly a lot of members of Congress that are interested in looking at state and local relief and its flexibility and its appropriateness to the circumstances. And it's been very well negotiated from a guardrails and what we should do moving forward. But I think states are going to have different discussions around what their expectation is to help localities and to be prepared to consider what the revenue options are going to be.
Great. And then Jerry, Angie, and Pat, what solutions do you see for slowing down the overall system decline?
I think the biggest thing that we need to do is, one, to start by documenting what's going on and what's taking place so that we can substantiate what the need is. So when we can define what our PCI decrease is going to be and continue to advocate for the funding that we need in order to maintain our networks at the level we need to do it. So I think that's the first step, is really making sure we have a clear picture of what the condition of our streets are in. And then it's also working on what those targets are and making sure those targets are realistic. So it's kind of a working the problem both forwards and backwards. What funding do we need in order to maintain the streets in the condition we want to maintain them in? And it's also taking a look at that funding and knowing what funding we're actually getting. How best do we allocate those dollars to do, the preservation treatments, the rehabilitation treatments that we need to do to maintain the streets as best we can.
I agree with that. We just need to keep reevaluating what we're doing now. We have a 3 to 5 year plan in place according to the funding we thought we were going to get, so many years ago, what we had today. So I can see us reevaluating all our streets, running new numbers on the PQIs on a lot of our streets, and basically driving a lot of them and seeing what's out there. We can't just do it by the computer alone, and seeing how they're being affected. So we'll reevaluate, look at the funding we have, and we may have to shift some areas around that we promised we're going to do, and we're not going to do them now, but we may be doing something else to get more bang for our buck, to stretch those dollars out.
I think communication is key on that as well. There's always these locations where you've made the commitment that we're going to pave this, and it was based on the assumptions we had at the time. But getting with your stakeholders, getting with council, getting with the appropriate people to explain to them why the situation has changed is going to be helpful for moving forward when we have to adjust the programs like we will be doing.
Right.
And as Angie mentioned, in the presentation, the other stakeholders, their things are, they're changing as well. And we try to have paving operations be kind of the last ones in. Well, if utility companies now are delayed, that puts us serious impact on how we may adjust our plans going into the future as well.
Great, thank you. We have one last question, and that's for Pat. Besides using IRI for construction spec, do you use IRI in your pavement management?
Could you repeat that again, please?
Yep. Besides using IRI for construction spec, do you use IRI in your pavement management?
We have IRI data, but what we have found by doing studies ourselves is IRI does not work well in an urban environment. There are so many factors that can impact the IRI numbers, whether it's cross crowns on the streets, at intersections, utility manholes, water valves. IRI becomes a really difficult metric in an urban environment. So we will track it. We have done tests to see, what our percent improvement is, but where like a highway agency may look for IRIs that are less than 100, we're lucky if we get an IRI that's less than 200. We have streets that have an IRI of 250 that runs smooth, or an IRI of 150 that that'll rat off because the manholes are right in the wheel now. So we found IRI just doesn't work really well for us.
Great. Thank you again to Brittany, Angela, Pat, and Jerry for participating on today's webinar. We'll also like to thank John and FP2 for partnering with PPRA for this two-part webinar series. The recording of this webinar will be sent to registered attendees. Thank you all and have a great day.